The morning sun crept over the red rocks of Arizona territory like a cautious coyote, painting long shadows across the Barrett homestead. Sarah Barrett stood at the well, her calloused hands working the rope with practiced ease. The water bucket emerged slowly, catching the early light like liquid gold. "Sarah, you been at that well since before dawn?" Her brother Thomas called from the porch. His voice carried that gentle reproach she'd grown used to since their parents passed 2 winters ago. At 23, Thomas had taken on the weight of their small ranch with shoulders that seemed too young for such burdens. "Water don't draw itself," Sarah replied, not looking up. Her auburn hair, twisted into a practical bun, caught loose strands in the desert breeze. At 19, she'd learned that survival in this harsh land meant rising before the sun and working until darkness forced you to stop. Their homestead wasn't much a 2-room adobe house, a small corral with 6 horses and a vegetable garden that fought the desert for every green shoot. But it was theirs, carved from the wilderness by their father's stubborn hands and their mother's endless faith. Thomas stepped off the porch, his boots raising small clouds of dust. "Saw tracks near the eastern ridge yesterday. Apache, maybe a dozen riders." Sarah's hand stilled on the rope. "How old?" "Day, maybe 2. He took the heavy bucket from her, their eyes meeting briefly. They both knew what fresh tracks meant. The Apache Wars had officially ended. But peace was a word written on papers back east, not lived in the borderlands. "We should check on the Millers," Sarah said. Their nearest neighbors lived 3 miles north, an elderly couple who'd lost their son to fever last spring. "I'll ride over after breakfast." Thomas poured the water into the wooden trough. Their horses, sensing the morning routine, nickered softly from the corral. Sarah had turned toward the house when she heard a sound that didn't belong to the desert morning. Not the cry of a hawk or the rustle of a jackrabbit. It was the jingle of metal on leather. Faint but unmistakable. "Thomas," she whispered, but he'd heard it too. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip, a gesture so natural it might have been reaching for a handkerchief. They came over the ridge like a thunderstorm, swift, violent, and inevitable. 12 riders, their faces painted with ochre and ash, their rifles catching the morning sun. Apache warriors. But not the reservation Apache who sometimes traded at the fort. These were Broncos, the wild ones who refused the white man's boundaries. "Get inside." Thomas pushed Sarah toward the house, drawing his weapon. But there was no inside that could protect them. No walls thick enough to stop what was coming. The first shot shattered the morning stillness. Thomas fired back, his shots measured and careful their father had taught him well. But one man with 6 bullets against a dozen riders was arithmetic that even a child could solve. "Run, Sarah!" Thomas shouted, emptying his cylinder. "The root cellar!" But Sarah couldn't move. She watched as a warrior's bullet caught Thomas in the shoulder, spinning him around. He kept firing with his left hand, blood spreading across his blue shirt like spilled paint. The riders circled the homestead, their war cries mixing with the screams of horses and the crack of rifles. Sarah finally moved. Not toward the root cellar, but toward her brother. She'd made it 3 steps when strong arms caught her from behind. The warrior who held her smelled of smoke and leather and something wild. She fought, using her nails and teeth, but it was like fighting the desert wind. He threw her across his horse's withers, her ribs slamming against the animal's shoulder. Through her tangled hair, she saw Thomas make his last stand. He'd found cover behind the water trough, reloading with bloody fingers. A brave man's death, their father would have called it, but to Sarah, it was just death, sudden and final and empty of meaning. The warrior on a painted horse raised his rifle. Sarah screamed, a sound torn from somewhere deeper than her throat. The shot echoed off the red rocks, and Thomas fell forward, his hand still reaching for bullets he'd never load. The raiders worked quickly after that. They took what they wanted: horses, food, ammunition. Smoke began to rise from the house as they set fire to what they couldn't carry. Everything her parents had built, everything she and Thomas had fought to preserve, turned to ash and memory. As the war party prepared to leave, Sarah caught a glimpse of the warrior who'd killed her brother. He sat his horse like he'd been born to it, his face unmarked by paint, a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. He looked at her once, a long, measuring look, then turned his horse east. They rode hard through the morning heat, Sarah bouncing painfully against the horse's shoulder, her captor's hand pressed against her back, keeping her from falling but offering no comfort. She could smell the smoke of her burning home long after the homestead disappeared behind the ridges. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Sweat soaked through her dress, mixing with tears she refused to let fall. She thought of Thomas, of the way he'd smiled when he teased her about spending too long at the well. She thought of the Millers, who would find only ashes when they came to visit. When they finally stopped at a hidden spring, Sarah's ribs felt like they'd been kicked by a mule. Her captor lifted her down, not roughly but without gentleness. She collapsed beside the spring, her legs too weak to run even if there was somewhere to go. The warriors watered their horses and filled their water skins. They spoke in Apache, their words flowing like water over rocks smooth and incomprehensible to her ears. The scarred warrior who'd killed Thomas stood apart from the others, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Sarah drank from the spring, the cold water shocking her back to full awareness. She was alive. Thomas was dead. She was a captive. These facts sat in her mind like stones, heavy and undeniable. As the war party prepared to continue, Sarah found herself lifted onto a different horse, this time sitting upright behind a younger warrior. It was a small mercy, but she took it. The desert stretched endlessly before them. A landscape she'd known all her life now turned foreign and hostile. The scarred warrior rode past, close enough that she could see the intricate beadwork on his rifle scabbard. He didn't look at her, but she felt his awareness like heat from a stove. There was something in his bearing, something in the way the other warriors gave him space, that marked him as different. They rode through the afternoon, stopping only to rest the horses. Sarah's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the ache in her bones. The life she'd known ended with a gunshot that morning. What lay ahead was as unknowable as the desert mirages that danced on the horizon. As the sun began its descent, painting the rocks in shades of blood and gold, Sarah allowed herself one last look back. Somewhere behind those ridges lay her brother's body and the ashes of her home. Somewhere behind was the girl who'd drawn water from a well, worried about vegetables, and believed the future held nothing worse than hard work and loneliness. That girl was as dead as Thomas. What remained was something else harder, emptier, shaped by loss and edged with the kind of anger that could survive anything, even this. The war party made camp as darkness fell, choosing a box canyon that offered protection on 3 sides. Sarah watched them work with the efficiency of men who'd made such camps 1,000 times. They built no fires, eating dried meat and drinking from water skins in the gathering gloom. She sat where they'd placed her, back against a boulder still warm from the day's sun. Her wrists were bound with rawhide strips, not cruelly tight but impossible to escape. The younger warriors cast glances her way, some curious, others hostile. She kept her eyes down, having learned already that defiance brought nothing but harder handling. The scarred warrior sat apart from the others, his rifle across his knees. In the fading light, Sarah could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 30 winters, with the lean build of a man who lived by raids and running. The scar that marked his face was old, white against his sun-darkened skin. His hair fell past his shoulders, held back by a leather band decorated with silver conchos. He hadn't spoken since the raid, hadn't joined in the victory songs the others sang quietly. He cleaned his weapons, checked his horse, and watched the canyon entrance with eyes that never seemed to rest. The other warriors called him Kohana, though Sarah didn't know if that was his name or a title. As full darkness settled over the camp, Sarah's body began to shake. Not from cold, the desert held the day's heat like a lover, but from the reality crashing over her in waves. Thomas was dead. She'd never again hear his laugh or argue with him about whose turn it was to mend the fence. The house where she'd taken her first steps was ash. One of the younger warriors approached her, barely more than a boy trying to wear a man's swagger. He said something in Apache, gesturing at her torn dress. Sarah pressed back against the boulder, her bound hands useless for defense. The boy reached for her, and Sarah found her voice. "Please," she whispered, the word barely more than a breath. "Please don't." A shadow fell across them. Kohana stood there, having moved with the silence of smoke. He spoke a single word in Apache, sharp as a struck flint. The boy warrior backed away, his face flushing even in the darkness. There was a brief exchange, voices low but tension high. Then the boy retreated to the other side of the camp. Kohana looked down at Sarah for a long moment. His face revealed nothing. Might have been carved from the canyon stone. Then he dropped something beside her, a blanket, worn but clean. He walked away without a word, returning to his solitary post. Sarah pulled the blanket around her shoulders with fumbling hands. The kindness, if that's what it was, confused her more than cruelty would have. She'd heard stories of Apache raids, of what happened to women captives. This silent protection didn't fit those tales. Through the night, she dozed fitfully against the boulder. Each time she woke, she saw Kohana at his post, a dark silhouette against the stars. He never seemed to sleep, never relaxed his vigilance. Once, when a coyote called too close to the canyon, she saw him rise soundlessly and disappear into the darkness. He returned minutes later, satisfied that the call was genuine. Dawn came slowly, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and amber. The warriors rose with the light, efficient in their morning preparations. Sarah watched Kohana tend to his horse, a paint stallion with intelligent eyes. His movements were gentle, almost tender, as he checked the animal's hooves and ran his hands along its legs. When he brought her water and a piece of dried meat, Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why?" she asked, not expecting an answer. He studied her for a moment, then spoke in heavily accented English. "Eat. Long ride." It wasn't an answer, but it was the first time she'd heard his voice directed at her. It was deeper than she'd expected, roughened by desert dust and long silences. The day's ride was harder than the first. They climbed into the mountains, following trails that seemed to exist more in the warrior's memory than in any visible path. Sarah rode behind the same young warrior, her body aching with every jolt. Kohana rode at the rear of the party, a position that let him watch both their back trail and the other warriors. Sarah caught him looking at her several times, his expression unreadable. There was something in his gaze that differed from the others, not desire or cruelty, but something more complex, as if he saw something in her that puzzled him. At midday, they stopped at a spring hidden among the rocks. While the horses drank, the warriors gathered around their leader, an older man with gray streaking his hair. Sarah heard her name, or what sounded like it mentioned, several times. The discussion grew heated, with gestures in her direction. Kohana stood at the edge of the group, contributing little to the debate. But when one warrior, broader than the others with cruel eyes, made a grabbing motion towards Sarah, Kohana spoke. His words were quiet, but they cut through the argument like a blade. The cruel-eyed warrior turned on him, speaking rapidly and gesturing with obvious challenge. Kohana's response was to shift his rifle slightly, a movement so small it might have been missed. But the message was clear. The argument died like a flame without air. That night's camp was tenser than the first. Sarah felt the undercurrents of conflict, saw it in the way the warriors grouped themselves, in the careful distance they kept from Kohana. He'd claimed something by defending her. She realized, made himself responsible in some way she didn't understand. She watched him from beneath lowered lashes as he went through his evening routine caring for his weapons. His horse, setting his sleeping place where he could watch both the camp entrance and her. He moved with an economy that spoke of a life pared down to essentials. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. When he brought her the evening meal, Sarah gathered her courage. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For stopping them?" He paused in the act of turning away. For a moment, she thought he might speak. Then he simply nodded and returned to his post. That night, Sarah's dreams were filled with gunfire and her brother's face. She woke to find tears on her cheeks and Kohana standing nearby, having moved from his usual position. He stood like a guardian or a guard, she couldn't tell which. When he saw she was awake, he returned to his place without a word. The third day brought them down from the mountains into a valley she didn't recognize. The warriors relaxed slightly, talking more freely among themselves. They were in familiar territory now, approaching their destination. Sarah's fear grew with each mile. Whatever temporary protection Kohana's intervention had provided, she was still a captive, still at the mercy of men who had every reason to hate her kind. The approaching camp meant decisions would be made, fates decided. As if sensing her thoughts, Kohana rode closer to the warrior carrying her. For a mile or more, he kept pace, near enough that Sarah could hear the creak of his saddle, the soft breathing of his horse. It might have been coincidence, but she didn't think so. Nothing this man did seemed without purpose. The sun was beginning its descent when they crested a ridge and Sarah saw the Apache camp spread below dozens of wickiups arranged along a stream. Smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in the dust. Her heart sank. There would be no escape from such a place, no rescue coming. As they descended toward the camp, Kohana moved his horse between her and the gathering crowd. She heard the excitement in the voices calling out, saw women and children running to greet the returning warriors. And in their eyes when they looked at her, she saw her future reflected uncertain, frightening, and completely beyond her control. But she also felt, like a small flame in the darkness, the strange protection of the silent warrior who rode beside her. Whatever came next, she sensed that Kohana had made a choice back in that canyon, one that bound them both in ways neither yet understood. The rains came on their fourth day in the Apache camp, sudden and violent as everything in this land. Sarah huddled in the wickiup where they'd placed her, listening to the water pound against the brush shelter. She'd been given to an elderly woman named Nayeli, who spoke no English but whose eyes held surprising kindness. Thunder rolled across the valley like distant cannon fire. Through the entrance flap, Sarah could see warriors scrambling to secure belongings and move horses to higher ground. The stream that ran through the camp was already rising, brown with runoff from the mountains. Nayeli gestured urgently at Sarah, speaking rapid Apache. When Sarah didn't understand, the old woman grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the entrance. Outside, the camp was in controlled chaos. Women gathered children, men worked to keep structures from washing away. Sarah's thin dress was soaked in seconds. The rain fell in sheets, turning the ground to mud that sucked at her worn boots. Nayeli dragged her toward higher ground, but Sarah's skirt caught on a thorny mesquite bush. She tugged frantically, the thorns tearing both fabric and skin. The muddy ground gave way. Sarah fell hard, her skirt now hopelessly tangled. Nayeli shouted for help, but her voice was lost in the storm. Sarah pulled desperately at the fabric, panic rising as water rushed past her ankles. The thorns held like barbed wire, each movement driving them deeper. A figure loomed through the rain. Kohana knelt beside her, rain streaming from his hair. Without a word, he drew his knife. Sarah instinctively pulled back, but he caught her wrist not harshly, just firmly enough to still her movement. "Be still," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. His hands worked quickly, cutting the tangled fabric free from the thorns. Sarah held her breath as the knife moved close to her legs, but his touch was careful, precise. When a thorn scraped across her calf, drawing blood, she saw his jaw tighten. The intimacy of the moment struck her, his hands on her ankles, steadying her as he worked. This was the closest he'd been since taking her from the boulder that first night. She could see the rain droplets on his eyelashes, the concentration in his dark eyes. When the last of the fabric came free, Kohana's hand accidentally brushed against her bare ankle. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat, but Sarah felt it like lightning. He pulled back as if burned, something flickering across his features too quickly to read. He stood abruptly, pulling her to her feet. For a moment they stood facing each other in the storm, her hand still in his. The rain had plastered her dress to her body, and she saw his eyes flicker downward before he turned away. "Go," he said roughly, gesturing toward Nayeli, who waited on higher ground. Sarah ran, her torn skirt flapping, her ankles still burning from his touch. When she reached Nayeli, she looked back to see Kohana helping secure a wickiup that threatened to collapse. He didn't look in her direction again. Inside Nayeli's shelter, Sarah shivered as the old woman fussed over her, providing a dry blanket and examining the scratches on her legs. The storm continued to rage, but Sarah barely heard it. She could still feel the phantom pressure of Kohana's fingers on her ankle, still see the way he jerked back from the contact. When the rain finally stopped near sunset, the camp looked different. The storm had washed away familiar landmarks, carved new channels in the earth. Sarah helped Nayeli clean mud from their belongings, grateful for work to occupy her hands and mind. As darkness fell, cooking fires began to reappear. Sarah sat beside Nayeli, learning to grind corn on a medite. The repetitive motion was soothing, almost meditative. Other women moved around them, some casting curious glances at Sarah, but most focused on their own tasks. Kohana appeared at the edge of the firelight. He spoke to Nayeli in Apache, his eyes carefully avoiding Sarah. The old woman responded at length, gesturing several times toward Sarah's torn skirt and scratched legs. Whatever she said made Kohana's expression darken. He set something down beside Sarah, a bundle of cloth. Then he was gone, melting back into the darkness between the fires. Sarah unfolded the bundle to find a doeskin skirt, well-made and butter-soft. It was too fine to be meant for a captive. Nayeli made approving sounds, helping Sarah change behind a blanket screen. The doeskin felt strange against her skin after years of cotton and wool, but it was warm and dry. The scratches on her legs had been cleaned and treated with some herbal mixture that took away the sting. Later, as the camp settled for sleep, Sarah lay on her blanket and thought about the day. The storm had washed away more than mud and debris. Something had shifted in that moment by the mesquite bush, some invisible barrier breached by necessity and accident. She thought of the warriors who'd wanted to claim her that first night, of how Kohana's protection had come at a cost she was only beginning to understand. In this world of careful distances and unspoken rules, his touch, however accidental, had meaning beyond the moment. Through the smoke hole in the wickiup's top, she could see stars appearing as clouds cleared. Somewhere in the camp, she could hear Kohana's voice, low and steady, speaking with other men. She didn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone, patient, firm, unyielding. The next morning brought curious looks and whispers. Sarah felt them as she helped Nayeli with morning tasks. The doeskin skirt marked her somehow, set her apart from what a captive should be. When she went to the stream for water, conversation stopped as she passed. Kohana kept his distance, but Sarah felt his presence like a shadow at the edge of her vision. When the cruel-eyed warrior from the trail approached her at the stream, Kohana appeared on the opposite bank, simply standing there cleaning his rifle. The warrior spat in the dirt and walked away. Days passed in this strange dance. Sarah learned the rhythms of camp life, picked up words of Apache from Nayeli's patient teaching. She learned that Kohana was not just a warrior, but a war leader, respected and feared in equal measure. She learned that his protection of her was causing ripples through the band, challenging unspoken traditions. But she also learned smaller things, that he favored his left shoulder, probably from an old wound. that he spoke to his horse in the morning with a gentleness he showed no human, that he often stood at the edge of camp at sunset, looking east toward lands she couldn't guess at. A week after the storm, Sarah was gathering plants with Nayeli when they came upon Kohana by the stream. He was watering his horse, seemingly absorbed in the task, but as they approached, he straightened, that careful distance settling over him like armor. Nayeli spoke to him, her tone gently chiding. Sarah caught her own name and saw Kohana's jaw tighten. The old woman continued, gesturing between them with obvious meaning. Whatever she was saying made Kohana look directly at Sarah for the first time in days. "She says I dishonor you with silence," he said finally. "That a gift requires words of thanks." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, "for the skirt, for everything." He studied her for a long moment. "You remind me," he said, then stopped, his face closed like a door shutting. Without another word, he led his horse away, leaving Sarah to wonder what ghost she resembled, what memory haunted the silent warrior who'd claimed her protection. That night, as Sarah helped serve the evening meal, she noticed Kohana watching her from across the fire. When their eyes met, neither looked away immediately. In that shared gaze was acknowledgement of something unnamed but undeniable, a connection forged in storm and silence, in accidental touch and deliberate distance. The other warriors saw it too. She heard the murmurs, felt the speculation. Whatever was building between her and Kohana, it would not remain unspoken much longer. The storm had washed away more than earth and debris. It had carved new channels that, once formed, could not be undammed. The fire crackled low, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. Most of the camp had retired, leaving only a few warriors around the dying flames. Sarah sat at the edge of the circle, having been summoned by Kohana's quiet word to Nayeli. She didn't know why he wanted her there, only that refusing wasn't an option. Kohana sat across from her, his face half hidden in shadow. The other warriors had drifted away one by one, perhaps sensing this was not their moment to witness. Now only the two of them remained, the fire between them like a chaperone. "You spoke my language that day," Sarah said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. "Where did you learn?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Fort Buchanan. 3 winters I worked there, breaking horses for the soldiers." Sarah tried to picture him at a military fort, taking orders from blue-coated officers. The image wouldn't form. "Why did you leave?" His eyes found hers across the flames. "Why does anyone leave? They took what they wanted, gave back lies." He picked up a stick, prodding the coals. "But I learned their words, learned their ways. Knowledge is another kind of weapon." "Is that what I am knowledge of your enemy?" "You are not my enemy, Sarah Barrett." The sound of her full name on his lips startled her. She hadn't told him her family name, but of course he would know. Warriors like him knew everything about the territory they raided. "Then what am I?" He looked at her directly then, and she saw something raw in his expression before he shuddered it away. A reminder of debts that cannot be paid. Before she could ask what he meant, he stood and moved around the fire to sit beside her, still at a careful distance, but closer than he'd been since the storm. From a pouch at his belt, he withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "This is not for you," he said, unfolding the leather to reveal a small silver locket. "But perhaps you should see." Sarah took the locket with trembling fingers. It was delicate work, far too fine for frontier craftsmanship. Inside was a daguerreotype of a young Apache woman, perhaps 15 or 16 winters. Her face was lovely, with eyes that held the same intensity as Kohana's. "My sister," he said. "Ayana, swift water in your tongue." Sarah studied the image, understanding beginning to dawn. "What happened to her?" "Soldiers came to our winter camp. Said we had stolen cattle, must come to the fort for judgment." His voice remained level, but Sarah heard the effort it cost him. "We had taken no cattle. But they had guns. We had women and children to protect. So we went. He stared into the fire, seeing other flames, other nights. At the fort, they separated the men, said the women would be safe, would be released when we proved our innocence. But soldiers have appetites. Officers look away. Sarah's hand tightened on the locket. She knew without being told how the story ended. Ayanna was proud, fought them. They said she fell downstairs, hit her head. His laugh was bitter as winter wind. Many bruises for falling downstairs, many injuries that stairs do not make. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, the words pathetically inadequate. "I found the men responsible, followed them when they left the fort on patrol." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. But vengeance did not bring her back, did not ease the weight here. He touched his chest briefly. Sarah handed back the locket, their fingers brushing in the exchange. This time, neither pulled away immediately. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you wonder why I protect you. Because the others wonder and make their own stories." He rewrapped the locket carefully. "Because that day when you begged please, you said, 'Please don't,'" I heard Ayanna's voice. Saw her eyes in yours. Tears burned Sarah's eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to show weakness. "So I'm alive because I remind you of your dead sister." "No." His voice was fierce now. "You live because you deserve to live, because taking you was wrong, even in war, because—" He stopped, struggling with words. "Because some things once broken cannot be mended, but perhaps other things can be prevented from breaking." They sat in silence as the fire died lower. Sarah felt the weight of his confession, understood the risk he'd taken in sharing it. Among his people, showing such vulnerability to an enemy, even one who wasn't an enemy, was dangerous. "The others don't agree." She said it wasn't a question. "No, they say I grow soft, say the white woman has bewitched me." His smile was grim. "Maybe they are right. But I have walked the vengeance path. It leads nowhere good." "What will happen to me?" The question she'd been afraid to ask finally escaped. Kohana was quiet for a moment. "That is being decided. Some say you should be traded to the Mexicans. Some say you should become Apache, take a husband, bear children for the people. Some say—" He didn't finish. "And you, what do you say?" He turned to look at her fully. In the dying firelight, she could see the conflict in his eyes. "I say nothing. My voice in this matter carries too much weight and too little. To speak for you is to claim you. To claim you is to—" "To what?" He stood abruptly. "To walk a path I swore I would not walk again." Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness with his usual silence. She sat alone by the dying fire, the ghost of his presence lingering like smoke. In the days that followed, Sarah noticed changes. The hostility from some of the band hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, become more careful. Word of Ayanna had spread somehow. Perhaps Kohana had told others, or perhaps they'd simply guessed from his manner. Either way, Sarah was no longer just a white captive. She was the woman who carried a ghost's shadow. Nayeli treated her with even more kindness, if that was possible. Other women began to include her in their work, teaching her skills with patience, if not warmth. She learned to tan hides, to bead simple patterns, to cook Apache dishes that tasted of smoke and sage. But it was the nights by the fire that shaped something new between her and Kohana. He began to join her most evenings, always with others present at first, then gradually as the only companion. They talked of small things, horses, weather, the proper way to track deer. Never again did they speak of Ayanna or the future that loomed uncertain. Yet, in the careful space between them, Sarah felt something building. When he handed her a cup of pine needle tea, their fingers would touch. When he showed her how to repair a bridle, his hands would guide hers. Each contact was brief, proper, witnessed, but each one left marks deeper than the scratches from the mesquite thorns. One night, as storm clouds gathered again on the horizon. Kohana sat closer than usual. The camp was celebrating a successful hunt, and the normal rules seemed relaxed. Someone had brought out a drum, and its rhythm filled the darkness like a heartbeat. "You never speak of your people," he said. "Your brother, yes, but no others." Sarah stared into the fire. "My parents died 2 winters ago. Fever took them 3 days apart. Thomas and I—" Her voice caught. "We had no other family, no one to miss us." "Everyone has someone to miss them." "No, we were alone even before. Frontier people often are." She pulled her knees to her chest. "Maybe that's why I don't fight harder to escape. There's nowhere to escape to." Kohana was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost missed it. "There is always somewhere. The question is whether it is better than where you are." Lightning flickered on the horizon. The drum stopped, people beginning to prepare for the coming storm. But Sarah and Kohana remained by the fire, neither willing to break this fragile moment. "I dream of her sometimes," he said suddenly. "Ayana, she tells me I'm a fool. For protecting me. For thinking protection is all I offer." He stood then, quickly, as if the words had escaped against his will. "The storm comes. You should go." As Sarah rose, he caught her wrist. The touch was electric, sending heat up her arm. "Whatever is decided," he said, his voice rough. "Know that you need not fear, not while I breathe." He released her and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the first drops of rain. She pressed her hand to her wrist where he'd touched her, feeling the echo of his fingers like a brand. Inside Nayeli's wickiup, she lay listening to the storm, but all she could hear was Kohana's voice. All she could feel was the burning where he'd touched her. She understood now why he kept his distance, why every accidental contact was followed by retreat. He was right to be cautious. Whatever was building between them was dangerous not just to them but to the fragile peace that let her live among his people. But knowing the danger didn't stop the feeling, any more than knowing fire burned stopped moths from seeking flame. The mockery started as whispers, snake-like and venomous, coiling through the camp. Sarah first noticed it in the way conversations died when Kohana passed, in the smirks half hidden behind hands. The younger warriors were the boldest, their jibes carried on the wind just loud enough to be heard. "See how the wolf circles the lamb," one said as Kohana checked the horse corral where Sarah was learning to braid rope. "Not wolf," another corrected. "Dog, tamed by white hands." Kohana's shoulders tensed, but he didn't acknowledge the words. He finished his inspection and left without looking at Sarah, though she felt his awareness of her like heat from a banked fire. The cruel-eyed warrior Kuruk. She'd learned his name was the worst. He'd challenged Kohana's protection from the beginning, and now he sensed weakness to exploit. During the evening meal, he spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "Perhaps we should give Kohana a white man's name, John, like the settlers say. John the Gentle, John the Soft Heart." His companions laughed, the sound sharp as breaking bones. Kohana continued eating, his movements deliberate and calm. But Sarah saw the muscle jumping in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip on his bowl. "Or maybe," Kuruk continued, emboldened by the laughter, "we should ask the white woman to sing for us. Surely she has tamed our fierce warrior with sweet songs, like a bird in a cage." "Enough." Kohana's voice was quiet, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. Kuruk stood, hand moving to his knife. "You speak to me of enough, you who shame us with your weakness." The camp held its breath. Sarah felt Nayeli's hand on her arm, holding her in place. Around the fire, warriors shifted, choosing sides without moving. Kohana rose slowly, his hand nowhere near a weapon. "I shame no one but myself. If you have challenge to make it, but do not hide behind words like a chattering crow." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then the chief, Naichi, spoke from his place of honor. His words were in Apache, but his tone was clear a warning to both men. Karuk spat in the dirt, but sat back down. Kohana remained standing a moment longer, then turned and walked into the darkness. Sarah found him hours later at the stream, sitting on a flat rock with his feet in the water. The moon was new, leaving only starlight to see by. She approached carefully, remembering her mother's warnings about startling armed men. "You should not be here," he said without turning. "Neither should you." She sat on a nearby rock, maintaining the careful distance that had become their custom. "They're wrong, you know, what they say about you." His laugh was bitter. "Are they? I grow weak, soft, unfit to lead warriors. You grow human." He turned to look at her then, his face a pale shadow in the starlight. "Humanity is luxury Apache cannot afford. We fight or we die. There is no middle path. Yet you found one, with me. And see what it costs." He picked up a stone, threw it into the water. "My brothers turn from me. My voice in council grows small. Soon I will be nothing but ghost who walks among them." Sarah pulled her knees to her chest. "I should leave, find a way to slip away, without me here." "No." The word came harsh and sudden. "You think they would let you walk free, you would be dead before the sun climbed high, or worse, taken by those who see you as prize to be won." "Then what do we do?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I don't know. For first time in my life, the path is dark." They sat in silence, listening to the water move over stones. Sarah wanted to reach out, to offer comfort with touch as she would have in her old life. But this was not her old life, and touch between them was flame near powder. "Tell me about before," she said finally. "Before the raids, the fighting. You must have been young once." A ghost of smile touched his lips. "Young. Yes, my father bred horses, beautiful horses, swift as wind. I would spend days with them, learning their language, their ways." "Is that why you're so gentle with your paint?" "Horses are honest. They do not lie, do not pretend. If they trust you, it is earned. If they fear you, it is deserved." He picked up another stone, turned it in his fingers. "With people, nothing is clear. Some things are clear." He looked at her sharply. "What things?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "That you're a good man, that you carry pain you didn't earn, that—" She stopped, suddenly aware of the dangerous ground. "That what?" "That I'm grateful, for your protection, for treating me as human when others wouldn't." Something shifted in his expression, a walls lowering briefly. "Gratitude. Is that what you feel?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you want me to feel?" He stood abruptly, water dripping from his feet. "I want nothing, cannot want, should not—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand. If I claim you, truly claim you, it changes everything, for both of us." "Maybe everything needs to change." He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes, desire against duty, want against wisdom. Then he stepped back, the mask settling over his features again. "Return to camp. Nayeli will worry." Sarah stood, anger flashing through her. "How long will you run from this?" "As long as necessary." "And if I don't want you to run—" He moved closer then. So sudden she gasped. He stopped just short of touching her, close enough she could feel the heat from his body, smell the sage and leather scent of him. "What you want matters less than what keeps you alive," he said, his voice rough. "And I have too much blood on my hands to add yours." He left her there, disappearing into the darkness with the silence of his kind. Sarah stood trembling, not from cold but from the nearness of what had almost happened. She pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, trying to calm her racing heart. The next days brought escalation. Karuk's faction grew bolder, their mockery less subtle. They called Kohana White Heart and Pet Keeper. They made gestures when he passed, crude pantomimes of submission. Sarah watched it all with growing dread. She saw how Kohana withdrew, spending more time alone, more time away from camp. His isolation fed the rumors, proved the weakness they accused him of. Things came to a head 5 nights later. Sarah was returning from the stream when she heard the struggle. In a grove of cottonwoods, Karuk had cornered her, his intentions clear in every line of his body. "The protector is gone hunting," he said, his breath sour with Tiswin. "No one to run to now. White woman." Sarah backed against a tree, her heart thundering. "Touch me and he'll kill you." Karuk laughed. "He grows too weak for killing, too full of white man's softness. But I will remind him what Apache do with enemies." He reached for her, and Sarah struck out with the water gourd. Catching him across the face, he snarled, grabbing her wrists, forcing her back against the rough bark. The impact when it came was sudden as lightning. Kohana hit Karuk from the side, driving him to the ground. The 2 men rolled in the dirt, a tangle of violence and rage. Sarah scrambled back, her wrists burning where Karuk had gripped them. Kohana fought with cold fury, every movement precise and punishing. But Karuk was larger, stronger, and drunk enough to feel no pain. He managed to pull his knife, the blade flashing in the moonlight. Sarah didn't think. She grabbed a rock and brought it down on Karuk's wrist. The knife went flying, and Kohana used the distraction to pin the larger man, his own knife suddenly at Karuk's throat. "Give me reason," Kohana hissed. "One reason to open your throat." Karuk's eyes darted between Kohana and Sarah. Even drunk, he could see death in the warrior's face. I meant no true harm. The Tiswin..." "The Tiswin reveals what was already there." Kohana pressed the blade closer, drawing a thin line of blood. "Touch her again. Look at her again. Breathe in her direction, and I will forget I ever called you brother." He released Karuk with a shove, standing in one fluid movement. The defeated warrior scrambled to his feet and fled, leaving his knife in the dirt. Kohana turned to Sarah, his chest heaving. "Did he hurt you?" She held up her wrists, already showing bruises. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. He took her hands gently, examining the marks. His thumbs brushed over the bruises with infinite care. "This ends now," he said quietly. "Kohana, no." He looked up at her, and she saw decision in his face. "No more distance, no more pretending. They will accept it or challenge it. But I'm done letting you suffer for my hesitation." "What are you saying?" He pulled her closer, one hand cupping her face with shocking tenderness. "I'm saying you are mine to protect, mine to defend, mine." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "If you will have such protection." Sarah covered his hand with hers, trapping it against her cheek. "I've been yours since the night you first stood between me and harm." He made a sound low in his throat, part groan, part surrender, but still he held back from the kiss that hung between them like a promise. That would come later, when the camp had accepted what must be accepted. For now, this claiming was enough: his hand on her face, her trust in his touch, and the knowledge that whatever battles came next, they would no longer face them alone. The council fire burned high, casting dancing shadows across the gathered faces. Every warrior of standing was present, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Sarah stood at the edge of the circle, Nayeli's protective hand on her shoulder. She could feel the weight of their judgment like stones on her chest. Chief Naichi sat in the place of honor, his weathered face unreadable. He was not old, perhaps 40 winters, but leadership had carved deep lines around his eyes. Beside him sat the band's elder warriors, men who had fought the Mexicans before the Americans came, who remembered when the Apache ruled these lands without challenge. Karuk stood among his supporters, the bruise on his throat dark as war paint. His eyes promised vengeance, though he kept his hand well away from any weapon. The confrontation in the cottonwoods had shifted something fundamental in the camp's balance. Kohana entered the circle last, as was his right as the accused. He wore his finest war shirt, one decorated with elk teeth and silver conchos. His hair was pulled back with a beaded band, every inch the warrior despite what they called his weakness. He didn't look at Sarah, but she felt his awareness like a physical touch. Naichi spoke first, his voice carrying the authority of his position. Sarah had learned enough Apache to follow the basic meaning the council would decide the white woman's fate, would hear all voices before choosing. Karuk stepped forward eagerly. His words came fast and harsh, gesturing frequently towards Sarah and Kohana. She caught familiar phrases: enemy, weakness, shame to the people. He spoke of raids where warriors died, of children hungry because the white settlers pushed them from good hunting grounds. Why should they shelter one who belonged to their destroyers? Others supported him, their grievances real and raw. A woman spoke of her son killed by soldiers. A warrior showed scars from cavalry sabers. Each testimony was another weight added to the scale against her. Then Kohana moved to the center. He stood still for a long moment, letting silence settle over the assembly. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, but with steel beneath. "My brothers speak truth," he began. "The whites have taken much, killed many. For this, we fight. For this, we raid. But what are we if we become like them? What are we if we punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty?" He looked around the circle, meeting each gaze. This woman did not kill our people, did not steal our land. She drew water from a well when we came. Her brother died defending their home, as any of us would die defending ours. "She is still the enemy," Karuk interrupted. Kohana turned on him, eyes flashing. "Is she? She has lived among us 2 moons. Has she tried to escape? Has she refused to work? Has she shown anything but respect for our ways?" "She has bewitched you," someone called out. "Perhaps," Kohana said, surprising them with his honesty. "Or perhaps I have remembered what my father taught, that strength is not only in the arm that strikes, but in the hand that stays the blow." He reached into his pouch, withdrawing something that caught the firelight. Sarah's breath caught it was an eagle feather, marked with red and black, a warrior's highest honor. He held it up for all to see. "I earned this at Blue Mountain. When we drove the soldiers back, I have ridden on 40 raids, taken many horses, counted many coups. My knife has drunk enemy blood." His voice rose. "Who here questions my courage? Who says I have not earned the right to speak?" Silence answered him. Even Karuk looked away. "I claim this woman," Kohana continued, "not as captive, but as one under my protection. If any would challenge this, let them challenge me. But know that you challenge not just a man, but the tradition of sanctuary our grandfathers honored." An elder warrior, Tarak, stood slowly. He was ancient, had ridden with Cochise in his youth. His words came slow but carried weight. "I remember," he said, "when Apache gave shelter to Mexican woman fleeing bad husband. She lived with us 5 winters, bore children who became warriors. Some called it weakness then, too." He looked at Karuk with rheumy eyes that still held fire. "Those children died fighting at our side. Their Mexican blood made them no less Apache." The tide began to turn. Others spoke not in Sarah's favor exactly, but in support of Kohana's right to claim protection. The debate raged as the fire burned lower, voices rising and falling like wind through canyons. Finally, Naichi raised his hand for silence. He looked at Sarah directly for the first time. "Come," he said in accented English. Sarah stepped into the circle on trembling legs. The chief studied her for a long moment, taking in her Apache dress, her sun-darkened skin, her calloused hands. "You would stay willingly?" he asked. "Not as prisoner, but as one of the people." Sarah's throat was dry as dust. "Where would I go? My family is dead. My home is ash. But more than that?" She looked at Kohana, then back at the chief. "I have been shown kindness here. Naili treats me as daughter. Others have taught me their ways. I would honor that. And if we raid your people again, if we fight soldiers, The hard question. Sarah had known it would come. I cannot take up arms against any people, but I can tend wounds, gather food, do women's work. I can be useful without being warrior. Naichi nodded slowly, then turned to Kohana. You claim her. Will you answer for her? Her actions become your actions. Her shame, your shame. Her honor, your honor. I will answer. And if she betrays us, lead soldiers to our camps. Kohana's response was immediate. Then my life is forfeit with hers. Gasps rippled through the assembly. It was the strongest vow possible, binding beyond death. Even Karuk looked shocked. The chief considered for a long moment. Then he stood, drawing his knife. Sarah tensed, but he merely cut a strip from his own blanket. He handed it to Kohana. Bind your wrists together, he commanded. Kohana took Sarah's hand, wrapping the strip around their joined wrists. The symbolism was clear. They were bound now, his fate tied to hers. The woman stays, Naichi declared. She is not Apache, but she is under Apache protection. Any who harm her harm Kohana. Any who challenge this decision challenge me. His gaze lingered on Karuk. The matter is settled. The assembly began to disperse, voices rising in discussion. Some seemed satisfied, others grumbled. But the chief's word was law. Karuk stormed off with his followers, but Sarah saw calculation in his eyes rather than acceptance. Kohana unwound the cloth from their wrists, but didn't immediately release her hand. You spoke well, he said quietly. I spoke truth. Truth can be dangerous. So can lies. She looked up at him. What happens now? Now you are truly under my protection. Not custom or honor, but law. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. It changes things. How? He glanced around, noting the curious eyes still watching. Come. He led her away from the dying council fire, toward the edge of camp where shadows grew thick. They stopped beneath a gnarled juniper, its branches creating a private space. You understand what I've done? He asked. If you run, I die. If you betray us, even unknowingly, I die. My life is now yours to spend or save. I didn't ask for that burden. No, but you carry it now. He touched her face gently, as I carry you. Why? The question she'd asked before, but needed answered again. Why risk everything for me? He was quiet for a moment, his hand still cupping her cheek. Because the night you whispered please, something broken in me began to mend. Because watching you learn our ways, seeing your strength, has shown me that enemies are made, not born. Because... He stopped, struggling. Because I am tired of living with only hate for company. Tired of seeing the world as us and them, nothing between. His voice dropped lower. Because when I look at you, I see possibility I thought war had killed. Sarah covered his hand with hers. And now, what's possible now? Now we learn what it means to be bound. The camp will watch, judge, some will test. His expression hardened. Karuk is not finished. He will find another way. I'm not afraid. You should be. I've made you a target. I was already a target. Now I have a shield. He smiled then, the expression transforming his face. You learn our ways of thinking. I had a good teacher. They stood in the shadow of the juniper, hands linked, foreheads almost touching. The camp sounds faded around them, dogs barking, children calling, the eternal whisper of wind through canyon walls. In this moment, there was only them, bound by cloth and choice and something deeper than either dared name. What would your father think? Sarah asked softly. The horse breeder who taught about mercy. He would say I am a fool, Kohana admitted. But then, he married a Mexican captive who became my mother. So perhaps foolishness runs in the blood. Sarah's eyes widened. Your mother was... taken in a raid when she was younger than you. My father claimed her as I claim you. They had 20 winters together before the sickness took her. He smiled at the memory. She never fully became Apache, but she was happy. They were happy. And you? Can you be happy with someone who will never fully be Apache? He pulled her closer, his arm sliding around her waist. I think, he said against her hair. I can learn. The night was moonless when Kohana woke her, his hand gentle but urgent on her shoulder. Sarah came alert instantly. Weeks of living among the Apache had taught her that sudden wakings meant danger. Dress quickly, he whispered. Bring only what you can carry. She didn't question him. The controlled tension in his voice told her everything. As she gathered her few possessions, the doeskin dress he'd given her, a blanket, the small pouch of herbs Nayeli had taught her to use, she heard it. The camp was too quiet, no dogs barking, no normal sounds of night watches changing. Kohana had her horse already saddled, his paint standing beside it. His rifle was in his hands, his movements those of a man expecting battle. Karuk, she breathed. Worse, he went to the soldiers, told them of a white captive. They come with first light, maybe 50 men. His jaw was tight with controlled fury. The scouts just returned. Sarah's blood turned cold. The camp. Naichi is breaking camp, moving the people to the southern canyons. But you... He touched her face briefly. You cannot be here when they arrive. They will use you as excuse to attack. Where will we go? Mexico. I have friends there. People who owe me debts. He helped her mount, then swung up onto his paint. We must go now, while darkness hides us. They walked the horses carefully through the camp, past wickiups being hastily dismantled, past women bundling possessions with practiced efficiency. Some looked at them with understanding, others with accusation. Sarah saw Nayeli standing by her shelter and raised her hand in farewell. The old woman touched her heart in response, then turned away. At the edge of camp, 3 warriors waited Kohana's most trusted companions. They would ride with them to the border, then return to help the band escape. The White Eye soldiers follow the main trail, one said. We take the old way, through Devil's Backbone. Sarah had heard of Devil's Backbone, a treacherous route through the mountains that even Apache avoided unless desperate. But desperate they were. They rode in single file. Kohana leading, Sarah in the middle. The warriors spread out to guard their passage. The darkness was absolute. Only the sure-footed Apache horses finding their way along paths invisible to Sarah's eyes. As they climbed higher, she heard at the distant sound of many horses, the clank of military equipment. The soldiers were early, pushing hard through the night. Her heart hammered as she realized how close they'd come to being trapped. Down! Kohana hissed suddenly. They dismounted, pulling the horses behind a rock outcropping. Below, barely visible in the starlight, a line of cavalry moved along the valley floor. Sarah could make out the shape of supply wagons, the glint of metal. This was no small patrol, but a full military operation. They waited, pressed against cold stone, until the column passed. Sarah found herself holding her breath, terrified that some sound would give them away. Beside her, Kohana was utterly still, his hand resting on his rifle. When they mounted again, he whispered. Karuk told them everything, the camp location, our numbers, even the water sources. His voice held death for the traitor. They rode harder now. The immediate danger passed, but pursuit certain to follow. As dawn broke, they were high in the mountains, the trail a narrow thread along cliff faces that dropped into shadow. Sarah kept her eyes on Kohana's back, trusting her horse, trying not to think of the emptiness inches from her stirrup. The sun was fully up when they heard the shots. Far behind, echoing off canyon walls, came the sound of battle. The band had been caught, or at least some part of it. Sarah saw Kohana's shoulders tense, his need to turn back and fight written in every line of his body. Your people, she asked when they stopped to rest the horses. Are Apache. They know how to scatter, how to survive. But worry creased his brow. The children, the elders, they cannot move fast. One of the warriors spoke rapidly in Apache. Kohana's expression darkened further. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Dust, many riders, maybe half a day behind." He looked at his companions, and she saw the moment of decision in his eyes. "You three, go back. Help the people escape. I continue with her alone." The warriors protested, but Kohana cut them off with sharp words. There was a brief argument. Then acceptance. They would follow orders, though it clearly pained them to leave their leader. As the three rode back the way they'd come, Sarah and Kohana continued south. The trail grew worse, sometimes disappearing entirely, forcing them to lead the horses across slopes of loose stone that shifted dangerously underfoot. "Why send them back?" Sarah asked during one such traverse. "We'd be safer with guards." "They have families, children. Their duty is there." He helped her across a washout. "And we move faster as two, leave less trail." By midday, they'd reached the highest point of the crossing. Behind them, smoke columns rose from the direction of the camp. Sarah tried not to think about what those fires meant, who might be dying because she'd lived among them. "This is my fault," she said. Kohana turned on her almost angrily. "This is Kuruk's doing. His hatred, his choice." He gestured at the smoke. "That blood is on his hands, not yours." They descended the far side of the mountains as shadows lengthened. The horses were exhausted, stumbling occasionally, but they couldn't stop. As darkness fell, they finally reached flatter ground, the desert stretching before them like a sea of silver sand. "We rest 2 hours." Kohana decided, finding shelter in a cluster of boulders. "Then ride through the night." Sarah slid from her horse, legs trembling with exhaustion. She'd thought herself hardened to riding, but this desperate flight was different from anything before. Kohana unsaddled the horses, rubbing them down with handfuls of dried grass, checking their hooves for stones. "Here." He handed her jerky and a water skin. "Eat. You'll need strength." They sat close together in the darkness, sharing warmth against the desert's night chill. Sarah could feel the tension in him, the coiled readiness for violence. He'd sent away his men for her, chosen her life over his duty to his people. The weight of that pressed on her like stone. "What happens when we reach Mexico?" she asked. "There is a village, San Elizario. Apache trade there sometimes. The alcalde owes me I saved his son from Comancheros." He paused. "We can rest there. Decide next steps." "And then—" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Cannot go back to the band. My choice today burns that path. Cannot take you to American towns. They would hang me. Maybe you too for living with Apache." His laugh was bitter. "We are between worlds now." Sarah took his hand, twining her fingers through his. "Together." "Together," he agreed, squeezing gently. A coyote called in the distance, then another. Kohana tensed, listening. The calls came again, but something was off the spacing, the rhythm. "Mount," he said urgently. "Now." They threw saddles on the tired horses, Kohana's movement swift but careful. As Sarah pulled herself up, she heard it the drum of hoofbeats, coming fast. "Ride," Kohana shouted, wheeling his paint toward Mexico. They flew across the desert, the horses finding reserves Sarah wouldn't have believed possible. Behind them, war cries split the night Apache, but not friendly. Kuruk's faction, or others who blamed them for bringing the soldiers. Kohana guided them between towering saguaros, using the giant cacti to break line of sight. Shots rang out, muzzle flashes like angry stars. Sarah bent low over her horse's neck, giving the animal its head, trusting Kohana to find the path. A bullet whined past her ear. Another struck a saguaro, sending chunks of pulp flying. Her horse stumbled, recovered, ran on, beside her. Kohana twisted in his saddle, firing back one-handed, his other still guiding his mount. The chase continued for miles, their pursuers gradually falling back but never stopping. Sarah's horse was lathered with sweat, its breathing labored. It couldn't maintain this pace much longer. Then, like a miracle, she saw the lights ahead, campfires, many of them, a large group, too big to be Apache. Kohana saw them too, making a decision without hesitation. He turned toward the lights, gambling that whoever it was would be less immediately dangerous than their pursuers. It was a Mexican trading caravan. 20 wagons circled for the night. Guards shouted challenges as they approached. Kohana answered in Spanish, his voice carrying authority. Sarah didn't understand the words, but she heard the urgency. The guards let them enter the circle just as their pursuers crested a rise behind them. Seeing the size of the caravan, the Apache warriors pulled up, unwilling to attack such numbers. They sat their horses for a long moment, silhouettes against stars, then melted back into the night. The wagon master, a stout man with magnificent mustaches, recognized Kohana. There was rapid conversation in Spanish, gestures toward Sarah, toward the desert. Finally, the man nodded. He says we can travel with them to San Elizario. Kohana translated. For protection, the Apache who chase us will not attack so many. Sarah nearly fell from her horse in relief. Strong hands caught her Kohana's, steady and sure. He held her for a moment, and she felt the tremor in his arms that said he was as exhausted as she. We made it, she whispered. To the border, yes, but this is just beginning. He looked back toward the mountains, where his people fled and fought. Now we learn what it costs to choose between worlds. The abandoned adobe sat at the edge of San Elizario like a forgotten prayer. Its walls were crumbling. The roof partially caved in, but it offered shelter and solitude, two things they desperately needed. Sarah helped Kohana from his horse, her arm around his waist, feeling the wet warmth of blood through his shirt. Just a graze, he said through gritted teeth, but she'd learned to read the truth in the tightness around his eyes. The wound was worse than a graze, a deep furrow along his ribs, where a bullet had carved its path during their final flight. He'd hidden it through the last day's ride with the caravan. But now, in the fading Mexican sunset, she could see the toll it had taken. Sit, she commanded, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. I need to clean this. He obeyed without argument, which worried her more than the wound itself. The mighty warrior who'd faced down his entire band was suddenly just a man, hurt and tired, and far from home. Sarah worked with the skills Nayeli had taught her, cleaning the wound with water from their precious supply, packing it with herbs she'd kept in her pouch. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced as she felt the heat of infection already building in his skin. You need a real healer, she said. You are real enough. His hand caught hers, stilling her movements. Sarah. The way he said her name made her look up. In his eyes she saw everything pain, yes, but also something deeper. Recognition, acceptance, perhaps even peace. That first night, he said slowly, when you whispered please, when you asked me not to raise your skirt, do you know what I thought? She shook her head, unable to speak. I thought of Ayana, of her voice in the soldier's hands, but also, he touched her face with his free hand. I thought how brave you were, captured, terrified, but still fighting for your dignity, still believing it mattered. It did matter. You made it matter. No, his thumb traced her cheekbone. You made it matter. You made me remember that enemies are just people wearing different faces. You made me see past the uniform of skin and birth. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. And now, what do you see now? Now I see the woman who chose to stay when she could have betrayed us, who learned our ways without losing herself, who stands with me here, at the end of one world and the beginning of another. His voice dropped to a whisper. I see the woman who owns my soul. She kissed him then, careful of his wound but unable to hold back any longer. It was their first kiss, there in that ruined adobe with his blood on her hands, and their future uncertain as smoke. It tasted of desert dust and desperate hope. When they parted, he was smiling despite the pain. My soul was never free again after that first night. I just took this long to admit it. Sarah helped him lie down on the blankets she'd spread, continuing her ministrations. The fever was climbing. She could feel it in his skin. Through the night she tended him, bathing his face with cool water, forcing him to drink, fighting the infection with will as much as herbs. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in Apache, sometimes in English. He called for his sister, for his father's horses, for Sarah. Each time she answered, holding his hand, anchoring him to life. On the second day, an old Mexican woman appeared at their door. She took one look at Kohana and began issuing rapid orders in Spanish. Soon, Sarah found herself assisted by what seemed like half the village women, all bringing remedies and prayers. "You are the Apache's woman," one said in broken English. "He saved Maria's boy from bad men. We remember." They worked together, Mexican and American, tending the Apache warrior who belonged fully to none of their worlds but had touched all of them. Sarah learned new healing songs, new prayers, new ways of seeing the same desperate hope. On the third night, his fever broke. Sarah woke from an exhausted doze to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You stayed," he said wonderingly. "Where would I go? You're my home now." He pulled her down beside him, wincing at the movement, but needing her close. "What are we? Sarah, not Apache, not white, not Mexican. What are we?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Free. We're free." "Free." He tested the word like a new language. "Yes, free to make our own path." As he recovered, they talked of the future. The alcalde had offered Kohana work-training horses honest work that would let them stay in San Elizario or move on as they chose. It wouldn't be easy. There would always be those who saw only Apache and white, who couldn't understand what they'd become together. But there would also be those like the Mexican women who'd helped save him, like Nayeli, who'd shown Sarah kindness, like the trader who'd given them shelter. The borderlands were full of people caught between worlds, making new lives from the pieces of old ones. "I need to know," Kohana said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. "Do you regret it, my protection? My claim it cost you any chance of returning to your old life?" Sarah considered the question seriously. She thought of the girl who'd drawn water from a well, who'd believed her life would be nothing but hard work and loneliness until Thomas found a wife and she became the spinster aunt. That girl had died with her brother. But what had risen from those ashes? "I regret Thomas's death. I regret the violence, the pain your people suffered because of me." She took his hand. "But you regret learning that enemies can become protectors, that protection can become love, never." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing each finger. "The warriors were wrong. You didn't bewitch me." He smiled against her palm. "You freed me." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they made their plans. They would stay in San Elizario through winter, let Kohana fully heal, save money from his horse training. Come spring, they would decide perhaps California, where gold had made all men equal in their greed. Perhaps deeper into Mexico, where Apache and American mattered less than skill and determination. Or perhaps they would simply stay here, in this borderland between nations and peoples, making a life that belonged to no tradition but their own. They had learned that home wasn't a place but a choice, renewed each day, strengthened by each trial. That night, in the adobe they'd claimed and begun to repair, Sarah lay in Kohana's arms and listened to his heartbeat, strong and steady. It spoke of survival against all odds, of boundaries crossed and prices paid. "My soul was never free again," he murmured into her hair, echoing his earlier words. "Nor mine," she replied, "and I would have it no other way." Outside, a coyote called a real one this time. No threat in its voice, just another creature of the borderlands, making its way between worlds, free as the desert wind. In the morning, they would face whatever came. There would be challenges, prejudice, the echoes of violence that had brought them together. But tonight, they were simply two souls who'd found each other across an impossible divide, who'd chosen love over fear, understanding over hatred. The warrior and the woman he'd refused to harm, the captive and the man who'd set her free by binding himself to her. They were all of these things, and none of them. Something new under the desert stars, proof that even in the harshest lands, in the most unlikely circumstances, love could take root and bloom. Their story would never be simple, never be easy, but it would be theirs, written in choices made and bonds forged, in whispered pleas and silent promises, in the space between two worlds where they'd carved out their own. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Please share your location in the comments so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and let us know your thoughts on Sarah and Kohana's journey. Your comments and reflections make these stories come alive for our community.